A listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, concerns over a major change to legislation that could see social security payments cut off for our most vulnerable. The amended bill quietly passed the Senate this afternoon, with a number of legal experts claiming the bill is a serious violation of the presumption of innocence and due process. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Wednesday, the 26th of November. South Australian Police have announced they've concluded a new search for missing 4-year-old Gus Lamont. Gus vanished from his family's outback sheep station almost 8 weeks ago and hasn't been seen since. Authorities have carried out a number of extensive searches, including the latest operation this week targeting a number of old mine shafts in the area. Police say they have now wrapped up their search with no new evidence found. Treasurer Jim Chalmers has admitted inflation is higher than the federal government would like after a shock jump in the latest numbers released today. New figures from the Australian Bureau of Statistics show annual inflation has climbed to 3.8%, up from 3.6% in September and well above economists' expectations and the RBA's target range. Mr Chalmers blaming temporary factors for the spike.
The through-the-year number was higher than we'd like it to be, but driven partly by temporary factors like the removal of state energy rebates.
Financial experts say the latest increase in inflation has put any future interest rate cuts in serious doubt. And Robert Irwin has won Dancing with the Stars in the US, judges describing the finale as one of the tightest results in the show's history. The Aussie star pushing through rib injuries to take home the coveted Mirrorball trophy. Robert's sister Bindi won the US Dancing with the Stars competition 10 years ago. Now it's time to get into our deep dive with welfare advocate Kristin O'Connell on the new changes to the social security payment system. An amendment means the government can cancel financial support to individuals who are suspected of serious crimes even before they're found guilty. Critics say the changes will leave our most at risk, including single parents, those fleeing family violence, and First Nations people at serious risk. The federal government disagrees, saying these powers will only be used in exceptional circumstances based on expert advice from law enforcement. Kristin from the Anti-Poverty Centre joins us. Kristin, this amendment, controversial amendment to this legislation, passed the Senate this afternoon, but it has an important backstory regarding the federal government. Can you explain the detail?
A few months ago, the government lost a court case. And what that implications were of that was that many millions of Centrelink debts have been unlawfully calculated since 1991. This is separate to and in addition to robo-debt, which affected a few 100,000 people. So the government's response to that was to try and pass legislation, very rushed legislation, to retrospectively make all of those unlawful decisions legal to protect itself from having to compensate people meaningfully. Completely separate to that, we've now seen this amendment added after 3 parliamentary inquiries had been conducted. So the Community Affairs Legislation Committee, the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Human Rights, and the Standing Committee on Bill Scrutiny had all looked at this legislation, had raised concerns with this legislation before it progressed through the House, where this amendment was added at the last minute and with no announcement.
So there's been zero consultation at all regarding this amendment?
That's correct. And Senator Katie Gallagher on Monday really gave a false impression in the Senate that there had been consultation with ACOS and Economic Justice Australia, and that was such an outrageous claim that those groups were forced to issue a public statement refuting that and making clear that they had not been consulted. Those groups, along with 62 other organisations and 116 academics and legal experts, have all publicly opposed this very strongly. And it's really absurd for the government to suggest they've done any consultation with experts who are representing people who will be harmed by this.
So it's no longer a proposed measure. This is now past the Senate. So does that mean it's in force?
Yeah, sadly, a couple of hours ago, we did see this pass through the Senate. The government was given many opportunities to allow this amendment to be split out into its own bill and to go through proper parliamentary processes to provide some scrutiny and transparency about what is happening and why it's happening and how it's going to operate. Even after the bill passed the Senate, Senator David Pocock put forward another motion to send it to an inquiry even while it is in effect. And both Labor and the Coalition voted against that, even though the Coalition, in its speeches on this bill, raised serious concerns about the lack of process here.
Okay, so let's just unpack the ramifications of this, because you're one of many people that are very concerned. And I'm going to quote here, even Anglicare Australia says, quote, "This bill means that people can be punished even before they're convicted." A number of other academic and legal experts have said, and I'm quoting here again, "This represents a dangerous departure from fundamental legal principles that underpin Australia's social security and criminal justice systems." So to explain exactly what this means, Kristin, somebody who is on welfare payments can have them immediately stopped even if they're suspected of creating or causing or carrying out a criminal offence. Is that correct?
Well, it's not very specific. It is some offences. It is a serious violent or sexual offence accusation, and that word is the most important one. It is an accusation. This will be issued if someone has a warrant out for an arrest that they may not even be aware exists. We have a long history in this country of people being falsely accused of these crimes, not just by police not doing their job or actively weaponising laws, but also by perpetrators of family violence against their victims in an effort to weaponise police against their victims. So there are many different scenarios that will be captured by this and the number of offences that it will apply to. And payments that are captured are all income support payments for people on Centrelink, plus paid parental leave and family tax benefit.
So, Kristin, just to clarify, this isn't people that are convicted of a crime. These are people that even are charged or suspected or an arrest warrant is issued. Is that correct?
Correct. So you may not even be aware that you have been charged and that there is a warrant out for your offence or that you are even a suspect. It has been pointed out by multiple people that a person fleeing a violent home may be cut off from the income support that they are relying on to survive at a time when they are fleeing in the most dangerous moment in their life, trying to protect themselves from that violence.
So really, to be clear again about this, Kristin, there has been some criticism saying that, people that are concerned about this are actually trying to protect convicted serious offenders. What would you say to that criticism?
I think it is patently absurd and deeply offensive for Tanya Plibersek to accuse the Council of Single Mothers and Their Children, the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Service, the Warringah Baya Aboriginal Women's Legal Service, the Law Council of Australia, Economic Justice Australia, and literally, all of the peak bodies for disabled people, the Anti-Poverty Centre ourselves, and many others, of not taking the harm to people affected by sexual violence and child abuse seriously. In fact, what we are trying to do is raise the alarm about the unintended consequences for victims of those crimes, of this type of law, and also for the fact that we know Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and disabled people are disproportionately targeted and falsely accused by police. So the Senate inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women found that 44% of women who had been killed by a partner had also been accused of being a perpetrator of violence. This is a very known problem. The government actually accepted that inquiry's recommendations in its response. So this is a real departure from things the government has already acknowledged are problems with our policing and criminal injustice systems.
So which minister is responsible for pushing this through?
It's a great question. Tanya Plibersek has been full-throated in her defence of this. The power itself will sit with the minister responsible for the AFP. So that will be the Home Affairs Minister. In the Senate on Monday, Senator Katie Gallagher revealed that the departments that were consulted are the Department of Social Services, the Department of Home Affairs, the Department of Education, and several others. So it's clear there have been a few people in the mix with this, but we don't know who they all are. But we do know that a lot of government MPs and certainly MPs in the crossbench did not know this was happening until after it had passed.
So why would the federal government do this, Kristin, if there are all of these concerns raised by very legitimate organisations about the serious unintended consequences? Sure, they may argue, let's crack down on the serious offenders that have been convicted of really serious crimes. But do you think they realise about all of these unintended victims and the consequences, and why would they do it?
So our organisations have not just publicly called attention to these concerns. Many of us have written directly to the Minister. They absolutely cannot claim that they do not know, and they cannot claim that they don't understand the expertise and credibility of the organisations raising these concerns. We don't know why they're doing it, because even if you believed that the rule of law should be undermined, and even if you believed that welfare recipients should be second-class citizens before the law, it still doesn't make sense. So Senator Pocock today, again in the Senate, raised the question of why it would be useful to cut someone off a Centrelink payment if you can't find them, when if they're using their ATM card, that would in fact give the police information about a person's whereabouts. There are also existing mechanisms that would enable the government to stop someone's Centrelink payment if they thought that was a useful thing to do. So that includes if someone does not complete their compulsory activities, if they're on a payment that has them, their payment is immediately suspended. If someone does not report their income, and that includes if you have zero income, you still have to report it, your payment will be suspended. If Services Australia asks you to confirm your current residential address and you don't do that, your payment will be suspended. So this doesn't make any sense, even, again, if you accept all of those violations of the rule of law. I would just add something really important. This really presents a risk to the community. If someone is feeling driven towards an act of violence or is at risk of perpetrating an act of violence, and you take away the bare means of survival that they have, I really feel it's quite obvious that you are creating the conditions that increase the chance that they may perpetrate another act of violence. We also have the risk of a person returning to a home where they have been violent towards people in that home to demand their cards, to demand their access to resources when they otherwise may have stayed away, and the risk of violence in those situations. So again, there's just so many unintended consequences that it's actually hard to cover them all in such a short space of time, which is why an inquiry was so obviously necessary.
So what happens now, Kristin?
Yeah, we're very worried about what happens now, because there is no commitment from government to be transparent about when and how these powers are going to be used. They were questioned by Senator David Shoebridge about how many people they expect to be captured by these powers, and they said that they hadn't considered it, which is pretty absurd, because the government should fairly easily be able to tell how many people have been accused of a serious violent or sexual offence and had a warrant out for their arrest in recent years. They should be able to, and on a welfare payment, right? So they should be able to say, we think 10 or 100 or 1,000 people might be affected by this. They have given a lot of weak excuses and no real information about how they intend to use it. They have claimed that there will be restrictions in place that are not actually embedded in the law. So we've heard some claims that this will only be used if someone is a threat to the community, but that is not in the law. That is just something that the government has said in defence of their attempt to get this through.
We really appreciate your time to explain it. Thanks so much, Kristin.
Thanks so much, Natarsha.
That was Kristin O'Connell from the Anti-Poverty Centre. We contacted Social Services Minister Tanya Plibersek this afternoon for her response. A spokesperson said, quote, "These powers will only be used in exceptional circumstances based on expert advice from law enforcement agencies. It is a serious power for the most serious of circumstances." The full statement can be found in our show notes. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.